Come see us on tour in Hartford, Connecticut, Syracuse, Atlantic City, Levittown, New York, Co-Host, New York, Providence, Rhode Island, Los Angeles, Bakersfield, San Jose, Toledo, Ohio, and Toronto, Ontario. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets. I'm very excited for our next guest, James Corbett, award-winning investigative journalist, and since 2007, hosts the Corbett Report, an independent, listener-supported alternative news source covering breaking news and important issues from 9/11 truth and false flag terror to the police state, eugenics, geopolitics, central banking fraud, and more. His new book. Here's his new book. Now, if you're like me, you'll say it's reportage. That's how I would read, but it's reportage. Yeah. See, Misha, you thought it was reportage? Yeah,
She's been studying French.
I thought it was reportage, but James has an English degree, so he calls it reportage. But there's no accent or nothing. You're just supposed to know that. How are you supposed to know that? But there it is. It's right there. It's available. He started writing it about 15 years ago, and boom, next thing you know, he's got a book. Look at that. Just overnight. Hi, James. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good, and you should know me by now. I mean, come on, I'm a hoity-toity Canadian. Of course it's going to be reportage.
So, I started reading this book yesterday, and I got about 80 pages in or so, and I feel like I've learned more in those 80 pages than I've learned in 10 years doing my own show. This is amazing. It's an amazing book. It's really you're a great writer, but you're meticulously sourced also, which is important to people like you. It's not important to people like me. And so if you're into that kind of sourcing, which I found out reading the book that there are people who like to just look at the sources first. I had no idea there were those kind of geeks in the world, but people who look at the sources first and then decide if they're going to read the book. So if you're one of those, this is the book for you too. So there's a million things. I have it, my first 80 pages, I have a million bookmarks in it already. I have it already all highlighted all over the place. And there's so many good parts about the book, but not only like, oh my God, I didn't know that about 9/11. Oh, I didn't know. But also, you talk about how they divide us, but we'll get into that in a second. The first thing I guess I wanted to ask you about was, you say in the preface, you say free humanity is still battling the same gang of greedy globalists, egocentric eugenicists, and power-mad plutocrats. Who are the egocentric eugenicists?
Well, as you will find out further on in the book, I do have a couple of essays that swirl around that subject of eugenics. But yeah, there are people who are obsessed with an ideology that goes back identifiably to the late 19th century, where the gentleman scientists of the English gentry came up with this wonderful idea that the gentleman scientists of the English gentry were better human beings than you and me and all the riffraff out there, and they deserve to rule over you. And that is the concept of eugenics. And basically, I mean, at the time when Francis Galton was coming up with the term eugenics and starting along that path, they didn't even know the mechanism of genetic transfer of genes from one generation to another. They didn't really understand any of that. It wasn't science. It was pseudoscience. But at base, it was just a justification for oligarchical rule. There is always some sort of justification that is given to every generation of human beings going back to the beginning of civilization as to why certain people have the right to rule over you. And back in the day, it was the pharaoh was literally the god on earth, or the Japanese emperor was literally descended from the sun god and all of that kind of stuff. Or in the enlightened, European Middle Ages, it was, no, God has appointed this family to rule over you. But, 19th century, people are starting to wake up to that. Maybe, I don't know if I'm going to go along with that. So they came up with the scientific or pseudoscientific gibberish reason for that. No, there's some sort of protoplasm that makes us fit to rule over you. And that was the rock star super science of the late 19th, early 20th century. Anyone believed in eugenics. And it was just such an obvious thing. Teddy Roosevelt and everyone else was trumpeting it. precisely because it gave them the justification for why they get to rule over you and they get to decide who passes their genes on to the next generation. They started all the eugenics sterilization laws and other such things that, oh, wow, wouldn't you know it, got transported overseas and suddenly taken up by the Germans. But it didn't start in Nazi Germany. It started in England and it was transported to America, where it was really developed by the Rockefellers and many other oligarchical inclined figures. Those are the eugenics obsessed tyrants who presume to rule over people. And I think that strain, that idea still persists to this day. It just takes a different flavor in the 21st century.
Well, it's funny how they used, wasn't there a descendant of Thoreau or that used, or Darwin, that tried to say that the reason why the offspring of rich, educated people were also rich and educated were because of their genes, not because of the fact that they were born into a rich family and were given great educations, right? Am I correct about that?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, yeah, it's not just a descendant of Darwin, it's many descendants of Darwin, because when you look through the ranks of the British Eugenics Society, they were populated for generations, probably to this day, by people who were in some way or another related to Darwin, many of them bearing Darwin's name. But the funny thing is, as I point out in the book, in one of the chapters there, in one of the essays, Darwin himself was concerned about his own family's inbreeding, because the Darwin line, people may not know about this in this day and age, but the Darwin-Galton-Wedgwood line was infamous for marrying in, I mean, it wasn't so much a family tree that branched out so much as branched in. And Darwin himself married his third cousin, but they were both products of a cousin marriage and things like along those lines, to the point where Darwin himself was so concerned about the problem that could result from all of these cousin marriages that were going on in his family, that he tried in the late 19th century to get the British Parliament to pass a question that they would put into the census about inbreeding, essentially, so that they could gather more data about this. Because he was concerned, because I believe, off the top of my head, I believe it was 3 of his children died in infancy, and many, many, many of the members of the Darwin-Galton-Wedgwood line were unable to have children, or to have children that would survive to adulthood. And he was concerned about this. So the funny thing is, yes, of course, they say, oh, well, you know, the greatest minds breeding with the greatest minds will make these supermen. But actually, it makes these deformed, decrepit monsters. And that, in fact, is one of the lessons of history, because as it turns out, a lot of course, royal families have been obsessed with inbreeding because they've got to keep it within the family, right? And as it turns out, the Spanish Habsburgs, for example, bred themselves out of existence. There were so many cousin marriages and brother-sister marriages and all sorts of craziness going on that eventually they became so deformed that they were literally unable to reproduce. That's what you get when you really start practicing eugenics. But for some reason, you know, they don't like to dwell on that fact.
You know, you say in your book, I'm a voluntarist who believes that the way to improve our world is not by casting a vote for yet another would-be political ruler, but by investing our time, energy, attention, and resources in building our own independent communities from the bottom up. What is that? What can you expand on that a little bit? What does that look like, and what does it mean to an individual?
So fundamentally, I mean, I guess the real questions that you have to ask people when they're talking about political philosophy is what are you fundamentally opposed to? But even more importantly, what are you fundamentally promoting? What do you want to have happen? And perhaps you go from one of those to the other. For example, if I am fundamentally opposed to the oligarchical authoritarian systems that clearly we've been living under for a very long time, and I think still to this day, it's not conspiracy theory to talk about. I've heard you say it many times. You are exactly right. We do not live under political parties. There are oligarchs. That is who rules right now. And I couldn't agree more. So the question is, if that is what I am opposed to, and I think that's the wrong way to go, what is the right way to go? And we have to think about this, well, if not hopefully intelligently, but also strategically. So, for example, in my essay on how to really defeat globalism, I point out that people get caught into the false binaries and sort of traps in thinking that are laid out for them. One of which is, okay, I'm against this big global government idea of taking all of this power and centralizing it in some far off body that I have no control over. So what we need then is, what's opposed to globalism? Nationalism. There you go. That's the answer, right? Well, no, I think we have to think more deeply about it, because the exact same idea that is at the base of nationalism is the idea that they then use to transfer your saluting the flag, your national flag, over to now I'm saluting the UN flag. That is a process that takes generations of indoctrination, but that is exactly what I think has been, the public has been steered towards. So we have to start thinking about, what does it mean to actually oppose centralized oligarchic authoritarian power? What is the opposite of that? It isn't just a different form of oligarchy. No, okay, instead of the global government, we need a national government. No, we have to start thinking about, how do we organize from the bottom up? What does that actually even mean? How does that work? And that's when we start running into people's mental roadblocks. So that's a good reason to use the word voluntarist, because the word anarchist, oh my God, you're a bomb throwing crazy. Oh my God, no, we can't have that. So voluntarist sounds a little bit more intriguing to people. What does that mean? I believe in voluntary human interaction. You know, the basic things that we learn in kindergarten about how you don't hit other people, you don't force them to do something they don't want to do, you don't steal their stuff. How about if we just applied that, I don't know, generally to all human interaction? No matter what badge or hat or, robe you're wearing, you are still just a human being who's privy to the exact same rules as everyone else. What would such a system actually look like? And I know the mind boggles at this, because we have been, all of us have grown up in this statist indoctrination that we must have the law and order of the state to come in and tell everyone what to do. But I think there are other ways of imagining that. And so, for example, in my essay on spontaneous order, a brief introduction to spontaneous order, I talk about the idea that is opposed to that. Instead of having top-down, centralized, authoritarian systems that tell everyone what to do and how to do it, which inevitably causes us all to fight for that ring of power, because who's ever sitting in that seat of power suddenly has control over the entire society, so it better be our man, and so we start fighting with each other. If there is no such seat of power, we have to learn how to negotiate, cooperate, and agree to disagree with the people around us as actual human beings. And there are ways to do that, and there are people who have thought about these types of systems in the past. I'm just trying to at least get people to imagine what such a world would look like, because, as I say, I think if you're opposed to authoritarian oligarchical systems, you have to at least understand what it is you were opposed and what the other side of that looks like.
And so what does that look like? What does it mean when, from instead of the top down, bottom up? What does it mean for an individual?
So for an individual, as I say, I think it goes back to the basic kindergarten level ethics that we all learn and understand, which just means that nobody has any special right to do anything that nobody else has the right to do. There's no magical incantation, no spell, no magical, 50% plus one of the populace voted for this thing, so now it's going to happen. No, we have to learn to negotiate. And so when you start bringing up these ideas, people will have their pre-planted objections, the most interesting and the most vociferous of which is, but what about the roads? I don't know, for some reason, every time you bring up this idea, it's like, how will roads be built in such a society if there is no government to make them? Well, it's funny, because the answer is, they will be built by the exact same people as they are in our system. It's just, instead of having some sort of government middleman to hire contractors to literally pave the roads, well, the community will decide, hey, we need a road, let's chip in and make a road. And those who don't want to do not have to. And this is the real question. This is where things get really philosophically important, because essentially, we could have the exact same system as we do now if we wanted to. But the only difference in a voluntarist society is, well, it would have to be voluntary participation. And you could say, nah, I'm good. No, count me out. I don't want that. That's not me. And that is essentially the mental roadblock for a lot of people. A lot of people can't imagine such a society. No. No, we must have guys with badges and hats and guns who can come to your door and extort you and throw you in prison and kill you if you resist. if you don't do what we say. And how could we imagine running society in any other way? I think there are other ways to do that.
Hey, winners don't make resolutions. Resolutions break. Instead, they just start and then maximize that momentum. When the goal is health span or being able to live better for longer, there are a few non-negotiables. One of them is quality. And when it comes to supplements geared toward high performers, no one does it like Momentous. They invest in NSF certification, meaning every batch is tested for heavy metals, harmful additives, and label claim accuracy, and is the reason they're trusted by all 32 NFL teams and collegiate sports teams, dietitians all over the country. Trusting research and their ecosystem of experts over fads means not offering every supplement on the market. Other brands can do that. Momentous believes in nailing the basics with bone-crushing consistency, then curating an intentional routine based on your individual goals. And by basics, we mean protein and creatine. Momentous sources CreaPure, the purest form of creatine monohydrate available. And it's an absolute must for both men and women for peak physical and cognitive performance. Go to livemomentous.com and try it today at 20% off with code Jimmy and start living on purpose. Come see us on tour in Hartford, Connecticut, Syracuse, Atlantic City, Levittown, New York, Cohost, New York, Providence, Rhode Island, Los Angeles, Bakersfield, San Jose, Toledo, Ohio, and Toronto, Ontario. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.